Kick off your boots and put down your hunting knife. It's time for the Outdoor Man Podcast with the man himself, Outdoor Man Dan. Join us for fun stories, useful how-tos, and insights into what being an outdoorsman means today and what it may mean in the future. From ethical hunting and conservation to new stories to tell around the fire. Let's get into today's show with your host, Outdoor Man Dan.
So, welcome to this week's podcast. This is with Josie. Now, Josie is was ex-vegan. Now a meat eater, completely the other way around. Now, I haven't done a podcast like this for 2 years, and the last podcast I'd done like this was the Vegan Hunter, which was with Katie, I had awesome response from so I'm hoping this one's going to have the exact same effect. Josie, thank you for coming on. It's much appreciated. And yeah, I mean, it's a big jump, isn't it, from one thing to another?
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you very much for having me on to talk about my story. Yes, I became vegan when I was 13, and I will say it was a very impressionable age. I became vegan right after I watched Earthlings, after I had seen the documentary, I believe, advertised at a concert I went to. And I decided veganism was the thing for me. I thought it was good for the earth. I thought it was good for my health, and I thought it was good for animals. And I became vegan overnight. I was one of those really stubborn preteens, and I told my mom I was going to be vegan, and I just stuck with it. And I I never really remember feeling that great, but I was a teenager and I was so used to, the health problems that everybody seemed to experience on a daily basis that I didn't really think anything was actually wrong with me. But I know that I dealt with, I would say, depression. Like, looking back on it, I was never happy. I dealt with, very bad skin issues. My weight fluctuated back then a lot. And I overall, like, early on, had pretty bad mental health issues. But going forward, I would say at about year 10 of being vegan, I was vegan for a full 14 years. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. I've started to have blood in my stool, like increasing amounts. I would have to go to the bathroom, it's kind of TMI, but 10 plus times a day. It was very debilitating. And due to the nature of that autoimmune disease, my body stopped really being able to absorb food as well. So I was also becoming severely malnourished. I would have severe pain when I ate. So I had to get that treated, obviously. And I remember, I believe in about 2017, I was hospitalized twice for my autoimmune disorder. Second time was a lot worse. And I was told by my doctor if I didn't go and get hospitalized when I did, I could have actually, passed away because of how badly my health was being impacted at the time. And I still, I don't really remember my doctor giving me too much flack about being vegan. He really just said, you're going to want to stay away from fiber. He didn't really give me the best advice in retrospect, because he really just told me to eat a bunch of, like, very nutrient deficient foods that don't have a lot of fiber. So it is what it is, though. He was just giving me the best advice that he could, knowing that I was vegan. So I did take some stuff out of my diet at the time, and I remember that the colitis improved. I was prescribed I believe a biologic medication, and I've the stubbornness has been there this whole time, so I was very stubborn about taking it. I really believe that there had to be another way to deal with my autoimmune disorder. And I still stuck with being vegan for 4 years after my, like, really bad flare. I consistently had colitis flares, just not as bad. And I did try to modify my diet to work, but within being vegan, like, I stayed vegan. And I refused to take medication. I took prednisone, which, like, initially healed me from my really bad flare. After that, I refused to take the biologic. And I just kept having, like, minor flares, like continued digestive issues. I never had normal digestion. Like, I really don't ever remember having normal digestion at all throughout the duration of being vegan, but especially during those 4 years. So finally, in 2021, my fiance's brother passed away, and that was a super stressful situation. That was the perfect storm to put me into another really bad flare. So with everything going on, it was also, COVID time in terms of like the hospitals. I did not want to have to go back to the hospital and deal with that again. And I was desperate. And so I finally, I've been, I people in my life had been tapping at me for years, dropping comments about how like maybe veganism wasn't working, but I never wanted to listen. And finally I let it penetrate, and I started to look into it online. I eventually found some people that did the carnivore diet, and I saw how much success they had healing autoimmune diseases, and I decided to give it a try. It did take me 6 months. Like, I stopped being vegan, and it took me 6 months of reincorporating foods to give carnivore a try, like to feel comfortable doing it. But when I finally did, it was the first time that I ever got into full remission from my autoimmune disorder. So for that, I can't say, like, I really can't put it into words how grateful I am that I did find this way of eating.
Well, that's awesome. How the I had three questions running through my head then, all at the same time. So the first thing first, when you turned vegan, did you just go cold turkey? That was it, bish bash bosh, straight into it?
I did, yeah. And I don't even remember what I was eating. I think I relied on a lot of meat substitutes back then, and I thought vegetables were like the healthiest thing you could eat. I tried to eat a lot of vegetables. I really, from the resources that I had and being a preteen, I tried to like eat pretty balanced, I think, but still, as a developing, like, a young adult, I'm sure I wasn't eating properly. But yeah, I did it overnight, and my parents tried to talk sense into me, but I just wouldn't listen.
And then obviously you had the change. Was there massive side effects to that? I mean, I remember listening to the Joe Rogan podcast when he said he tried the vegan diet for a month and he had a real bad upset stomach and one thing and another. Did you find that, because you said it took you about 6 months to sort of get yourself into it? Was it not that? I mean, how did that work?
You mean when I did transition to the carnivore
Yeah,
diet,
yeah,
or?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I did it so slowly that by the time I did start the carnivore diet fully, I didn't really experience bad side effects. If I would have gone full turkey again, I think that I might have completely discouraged myself. So I'm glad that I did it slowly. The way that I did do it, I decided to stop being vegan, and I kind of just dipped my toes in at first. I started having bone broth
Yeah.
and fish. I believe I started off with bone broth and shrimp, and then I added like salmon. I did that for a couple of weeks, and then I added in chicken and turkey, and I gave that another couple of months. Like, it really took me a while to take that leap to have beef again, because I thought beef was like the worst thing you could possibly eat. And finally, I would say it did probably take me about a full 6 months to have beef again. But at that point, I'd been eating chicken and turkey and fish and eggs. Eggs was another thing that I did add in pretty early on.
Yeah.
So by the time I added in beef, it didn't affect me badly. And really, I knew I was doing the right thing when I finally did add beef back into my diet, because I just felt so much better in like every respect. So really, I do think that it's important, if you're coming from a vegan diet, to incorporate things slowly, because you will, I'm sure, I mean, I've heard other people talk about it, that they had, really bad digestive upset, diarrhea. So I would say that it's worth avoiding that, because you don't want to completely discourage yourself from this way of eating if it could really help you.
No, I mean, I tried the carnivore thing for about 2 days, and that knocked me right on my ass, to be honest. I was just lethargic, but I couldn't quite get how much meat I should be eating at each portion, and it just threw me. So I sort of canned it, but I eat just a clean diet now. I try not to eat processed foods and just whole foods, which has made a big difference to me. Um, so. Uh, And it's quite interesting. So you started with like the fish, and then went sort of through the food group that way, because you think a lot, if you look at a lot of vegetarians, they do the same. That a lot of vegetarians will eat fish, or parts of, and it's quite interesting to see that you sort of follow that same sort of train back to the good stuff that is beef. Um, I smiled because I remember watching, was it Game Changers on Netflix? That must have made a serious amount of vegans in the world, because everyone was like talking about it. And I thought to myself then, I thought, "Well, I can't see it personally." But yeah, I think that was a big player as well.
I never watched that, but by the time that came out, it was when I was vegan, I remember that. But I was already so stooped and like I was already like in veganism. I was dedicated, so I didn't really watch the new documentaries that came out because I guess I like didn't really think I needed to. I was like already convinced. But yeah, oh, I watched Earthlings, I watched Forks Over Knives, I watched a bunch of other stuff like early on. But then when Game Changers came out, I heard a ton about it. Like I know what it's about. I believe it's like about athletes that found success on the vegan diet, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was interesting. It just needed to be more rounded. It was made by the left for the left, and there was nothing. I remember. So again, Joe Rogan had the guy on who made Game Changers on the podcast one day, and then about a week or so later, he had a guy who used to be an ex-vegan. Can't remember the guy's name now, and then he was talking about like the vegan high and how good you feel when you start doing it, and then all of a sudden there's this drop, and it's quite interesting to sort of hear. How was your energy levels when you went from? Was there like a significant boost in energy when you went from your vegan to your carnivore or started eating meat? Did you see a difference straight away?
100%. Yeah, I would say I dealt with a lot of lethargy before I started the carnivore diet, and I've never been that big on carbs, but when you eat a vegan diet, by default, you're going to eat a lot of carbs because that's, your main source of nutrients,
Yeah.
I would say. So I was still eating a lot of carbs. I remember I would, eat my lunch when I was on my lunch break at work and I would want to go to sleep and take a nap after. And I had been aware of what a keto diet was, for a while, like since I became a teenager, I would say. And that to me always seemed like, oh no, like that has to be so bad for you. So I never really pictured myself to end up doing a keto diet, but by default, carnivore is a keto diet. So I was very surprised because I was a little bit concerned, like, oh my God, if I'm not eating any carbs, how are my energy levels going to be? But I have consistent energy now. I'm never, I would go to work and be, fully energized in the morning. I do still have coffee, so I should clarify that. Like I'll have 1 cup of coffee in the morning, but I never experience those dips in my mood. I never want to, take a nap after I eat. I do think that it's also important if you're going to do a fully fledged carnivore diet to eat enough fat because I do think my energy levels would suffer if I was limiting the amount of fat that I ate. But it's like night and day. I I never really feel lethargic anymore. So that's been something that's improved for me very greatly.
And helping with like the autoimmune diseases and stuff like that. That's a big thing throughout, isn't it? I mean, I remember hearing a podcast that you done with somebody else, and that was like a big topic, and how well it had helped. And that is like a big sort of, I say side effect. That's probably the wrong word to use, really, but um, it's just one of them spin-offs that it just happens and just works. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people, and I can't blame them when they come across my story, they're like, well, you went from veganism to carnivore. Like, that's two extremes. It makes no sense. But I really, some people just aren't going to get it, but I try to always drive the point home that I do this way of eating, I would say out of a medical necessity. I, you know, my digestion was not normal again until I started a very strict carnivore diet. I think I might not have taken coffee yet. I don't think I've ever had the courage to take coffee out of my diet because I love it so much, but
You can't be
I
miserable
have
all the time, can
decreased.
you?
What was that?
They say you can't be miserable all the time. You've got to have some perks in life.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think I ever actually took coffee out, but I took everything else out. And I've taken like I have 1 cup of coffee a day. Decreased it a lot, but I didn't have normal digestion again until I got really strict for a couple of months. And then finally I had digestion the way that I remember it being when I was like a kid, and I ne didn't have any digestive issues to speak of, which really I couldn't even remember when the last time I had that was. Like, I don't remember my digestion ever even being normal when I was vegan, like throughout the entire duration of that. So, yeah, 100%. I don't think that I could have ever gotten back to a state of health like I have now if I had never done like a very strict carnivore diet. I
Yeah.
still do a pretty strict carnivore diet, but like for example, like I do pay a lot more attention to ingredients now. So one thing that I also didn't want to give up was hot sauce. And I have found like a hot sauce that doesn't really seem to affect me, but I make sure now like the ingredients are organic. It doesn't have like any chemicals in it, like things like that. But other than that, I really like I do stick pretty closely to a strict carnivore diet still. I haven't really experimented too much with bringing anything back in yet.
So you touched briefly on about people saying things. Now, obviously, when you tag something in Instagram, you're vegan and you're carnivore. Have you had much stick, much hatred? How does that work for you?
I used to have a lot more hate from vegans. I don't know what happened. I think that I did kind of revamp my page at one point because when I started my page in I believe it was early 2022, the whole, selling point for me was I went from veganism to the carnivore diet. And I got a lot of hate from vegans, like a lot of, accusations of you didn't do it right. And I used to try to push back on them because I thought that it might get through to them, like, and they would understand. But really, it doesn't really do much. Like, you just end up arguing with people, and it's really not worth it. It's a waste of everyone's time. So I did kind of rebrand. I don't talk about how I was vegan too much anymore. It's obviously an important part of my story, but it's also something that it's been so many years now, it doesn't really cross my mind as much anymore either. Like, I don't remember as much about what it was like when I was vegan. So I used to get a lot worse flack from vegans. I used to, I don't know if you were following me at the time, and I'm not necessarily proud of myself for this, but I had something called the wall of shame on my Instagram.
Right.
And it was the crazy unhinged comments that I would get from vegans. And it was just screenshots of them. I ended up taking it down because ultimately I kind of had this epiphany of like, I was never one of those people when I was vegan who would go find ex-vegans and try to like uh ostracize them. I would never do things like that. But I had this epiphany of like, I used to be in their shoes in a way. Like I used to not know better. So I don't want to have this like image about my page of like hating vegans because I don't hate vegans. I don't hate anyone. I just want to be able to talk about my story and not, get death threats and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's really, but that's why I deleted it because I was like, I'm not trying to like, you know, make vegans feel stupid.
Yeah, you'd almost just sort of being as bad as them, but on the reverse sort of thing. I get it. Now you touched at the beginning of this, you said about animals. You said you went vegan, one thing, better for the animals, or kind of better for the animals. So hunting and stuff like that, is that anything now you've done, consider, want to do, or you just happy
I
to go to the supermarket and just get your meat?
I do just buy my meat at a supermarket right now. I mean, I do try to buy from farms that are local whenever I can, and dairy too. I try to get dairy also from local farms. Not always. Like it's not, I would say I mostly do buy meat at the grocery store right now. I'm not necessarily opposed to hunting, but for me, it's just something that I've never really even considered doing. I do, respect that it is something that we would need to do if we didn't have the convenience of grocery stores, like everyone would need to do it to get food. So I haven't personally done it. I don't necessarily think that I would be opposed to it if I was like if the opportunity came up, but also, using a gun just freaks me out. Like I feel like I'm gonna accidentally shoot it somewhere I don't mean to. So that's another concern for me. But yeah, I would say I'm open to it. I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah. That was one of the big things about the whole podcast for me when I started was I don't care what my kids do when they grow up. I just want them to know where food comes from. So if they want to be vegan when they get older, then they can be it as long as they know the reasons why we do things, and the importance behind it all. I said before, like, more than once, I think in the US, I'm not sure in the UK, and I always state it as in the UK, but that the deer population rises by like 30% a year. So if we're not doing something about it, then it's going to get outrageous. Well, it is outrageous now over here, and it's clean meat, and that's what I like. It's clean, lean meat. It's tasty. It's full of protein, and well, it's certainly my favourite sauce. But I get the reason why you wouldn't or don't as well, because there's so much going on out there with whatnot. It's sometimes just easier, isn't it, to go to the store, sort yourself out, and be happy, as it were. Uh,
Yeah, I'm
Sorry, I was just looking at my question in the show notes. That's why I was just
all
uh,
good.
yeah. So that's really cool. So what's next? I say, you've sorted your page out, so you've taken the heat off the vegans, as it were, and doing your thing, which is how we got chatting the other day when I said you just got to be you. Opinions are like arseholes. Everyone's got one. So what's next? Are you looking to increase just to do more of the keto style eating, or are you going to put more veg back in your diet? How are you going to, what's your plans?
Right now, I do still continue to do the carnivore diet. I mean, as I did talk about, I've added hot sauce back in, and I've dabbled with adding back in, I would say peppers at some points. It's been a while since I've even had that, but I do still plan to stick to the carnivore diet. And if I ever did add any type of vegetables, or I would say I probably gravitate more to fruits, but I'd just be very conscious of what might be in it, if it's organic, like glyphosate, for example, and pesticides are something that I've realized should be a lot bigger of a concern for me. But right now they're not because I don't really eat them. But yeah, I sticking to the carnivore diet, and I am trying to uh figure that out right now with the rebranding. I mean, ultimately, I guess it's not a rebrand. I still do make content about doing the carnivore diet. I have been thinking a lot about that lately, and I do think I want to start to gear my content towards like a messaging towards women, because I know, for example, when I was growing up, meat, like especially red meat, was so demonized, and that was a big part of what made me feel so confident about being vegan. So I think that that's a very important thing to talk about. I'm trying to, figure it out along the way with how, I want to put that messaging into my content, but definitely going towards that type of a message with future content. And I do want to start to branch out a little bit and talk about current events in the health sphere. I don't know how much you follow it, but with like Make America Healthy Again, I think that it is great that RFK wants to take a lot of the chemicals out of our foods. So I just talk about more stuff like that. And that's what I think, that's what I think I'm going to try to gear things towards more so
Look,
than going after vegans.
look at a book called The Body's Many Cries for Water. Dr. Bodman Gellish, I don't know however you pronounce it. I read that when I was doing all the hypnotherapy and the reflexology in my spare time, and he talks about how he's helped more people by drinking water and being hydrated all the time, rather than going to the doctors, being pumped full of drugs, which most of them are poison, as it were. How he describes it. So have a look at that. That might be something that really interests you.
What is it called? The book?
The body's many cries for water.
Body. Okay, yeah, I'll
I'll
check
um
that
I'll
out.
ping you a message. Right, what's that saying up there? Yeah, a few minutes left. So if anybody wants to find you or hear more or all that jazz, where they go, what they do.
So you can find me on Instagram under The Explant Eater, and I am under the same name on YouTube, The Explant Eater. I would say Instagram and YouTube are my main platforms that I use.
Well, yeah, and that's what I found. It was Instagram. Your story is fantastic. I followed it for a long time, probably since COVID, I would say. And
Oh
then was
wow,
going to reach
okay.
out, didn't reach
So you've
out,
been there
and
from the
then
beginning.
yeah, and I think it's fantastic what you're doing. I really do. If you get time, check out my podcast I've done with Katie, Kate Sickley, the vegan hunter. Her take on veganism is out of this world, and she's had so much hate for it, and I think it's the best outlook ever. So check that out. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It is much appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad that we got to connect.
You've been listening to the Outdoor Man Podcast. We're glad you're here. We'd love to connect with you on social media. Find us on Twitter at Podcast Outdoor, on Instagram, Outdoor_Man_podcast, on Facebook, Outdoor Man Podcast, and you can even reach us by email, dan@OutdoorManUK. Let us know your outdoor questions, and be sure to tag us when you're outside living your best life. Until next time, be the example.